Superman, the Human Bomb, Metropolis, Florida, February 6, 2007. It was a normal winter day in Metropolis, the kind of winter that you find in Florida, a very mild one. Well, at the famed Metropolis Club, a local gentleman's club, a man was inside reading the newspaper. He was a tall man, 45 years old, blonde hair with a thick mustache. His name was Darren Butler, and he was reading the Daily Planet. On the headlines of the Daily Planet, it read, Superman wages war on crime. As he was reading, another man, same age as him, tall, with jet black hair graying at the temples, and a thick mustache himself, comes in, and Butler saw him and only identified him as Conway. He says, "Oh, hello, Conway." And Conway says, "Oh, hi, Butler." And he asks Darren Butler, "Is this seat taken?" Darren says, "No, you could have it." And then the man named Conway sits down. And Darren Butler offered Conway a drink, and he says, "A drink?" Conway says, "Oh, no." And then Conway grabs a Life magazine and begins to go through the pages. And Darren Butler releases a loud sigh. And then Conway asks, "What's going on?" And Darren Butler answered Conway, "I'm just reading about the latest exploit of Superman. Fabulous character he is." And then Conway says, "Even more fabulous than Butler?" Butler lets out a smile, and he says, "Well, maybe." And then he shows Conway the newspaper. Conway grabs the newspaper from Darren Butler and reads it aloud. Superman wages war on crime. And Darren Butler says, "Can you believe it? He shut down 14 illegal casinos in less than an hour. Simply amazing." And then Darren Butler grabs his drinking glass and takes a sip of brandy, and Conway says to Darren Butler, "Do I detect a note of anger?" Then Darren Butler puts down his glass and he says, "You sure do." And then he goes on to explain to Conway, "Could you imagine having that much power? To fly like a bird, to span thousands of miles in the blink of an eye, to smash through concrete wall as if they were paper, and to defy authority without fear of punishment." And then Conway says to Darren Butler, "But Superman doesn't defy authority, he cooperates with them." And Darren Butler says to him, "I know, but he has the power to, if he wants. That's what counts, the power, the ability." Conway, looking at Darren Butler, reaches into his coat and pulls out a cigarette and lights it up, and he asks Darren Butler, "What would you do if you had that power? What would you do if you were Superman?" he asks. And then Darren Butler raises both of his eyebrows and puts his hand on his chin, and he begins thinking, and he says to Conway, "Let's not go into that. But I was thinking when I was reading that newspaper something better than being Superman. Instead, having the ability to control him." And Conway reacts by saying to Darren Butler, "Well, if you accomplish that, please let me know. I have a few odd jobs for him to take care of." Conway noticed the look on Darren Butler's face, that look of a man who was really scheming, thinking very deeply. And Darren Butler says to Conway, "To be able to say that you control Superman, even if it was just for 30 minutes, why? It's like saying that you hold the world in the palm of your hand. No king, no emperor, no dictator ever had more power." Conway was looking at Darren Butler with a surprised look and says to him, "Aren't you getting a little too serious about this, Butler?" And Darren Butler looks at Conway and says, "I've never been more serious about this in my life. I would just give about anything that I own just to control Superman for 30 minutes. And Conway says to Butler, "That's impossible. Why talk about it?" And Darren Butler puts his hands on his knees and he says to Conway, "I don't think it's impossible." And Conway says, "Oh, come now," and then takes a puff out of his cigarette. And Darren Butler looks at Conway and lets out a slight smile and says to him, "Would you like to take a little bet?" Conway takes another puff out of his cigarette and blows the smoke out of his mouth, and he says to Butler, with a slight giggle, Knowing you, I should have known this was leading up to this. And then he asks Butler, okay, what's the gimmick? And Darren Butler answers him, I'll make you a bet I can control Superman for 30 minutes. And Conway asks Butler, what do you mean by control? And Darren Butler answers Conway, oh, I mean, keep him in my power, make him do whatever I want for about 30 minutes. Then Conway sinks back into his chair and takes another puff of his cigarette, and he says to Butler, for 30 minutes? Butler nods his head yes. And then Conway says, all right, you got yourself a bet. How much? And Darren Butler says to him, $100,000. And Conway says to Darren Butler, aren't you a little steep? And Darren Butler answers him back, well, don't you want me to do the impossible? Let's make it worthwhile. And Conway says, all right, you're on. Then Conway extends his hands out to shake Darren Butler's hands, and he says to Darren Butler, $100,000, you can control Superman for 30 minutes. Then Conway says to Butler, now I think I'll have that drink. 3 days later, the Daily Planet building. It was a normal working day, as most of the reporters were out looking for stories. And at the reception desk, Darren Butler was there, and he asked to speak with Lois Lane. And the receptionist says, well, I'm sorry, Lois Lane is busy right now. Can I take a message? And Butler says to the receptionist, no, what I have to say to Miss Lane personally. It's very imperative that I talk to her, says Butler. Then the receptionist says, okay, let me phone her. She picks up the phone and calls Lois and tells Lois that there was a man here that needed to speak to her and it was very urgent. Lois says over the phone to let him in, and then the receptionist hangs up the phone and tells Butler how to get to the newsroom desks, and Butler thanks the woman and walks off. Moments later, Butler arrives at the largely empty newsroom and walks right up to Lois's desk. Butler was wearing a large trench coat, and Lois grew very suspicious as Butler walked up to her desk, and she asks the man, so sir, how may I help you? And then Butler identifies himself and he says, hi Miss Lane, my name is Baum. And then Lois quickly grabs a notepad and her pen and she writes it down, B-A-U-M. And then Butler corrects her, no Miss Lane, it's B-O-M-B, as in bomb, and the first name is human. Lois is like, sir, what are you getting at? This is not funny. And Butler says, I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to give a message to Superman. And Lois gets up to throw Butler out of the newsroom, and she says, I'm sorry, sir, I'm extremely busy. You'll have to leave. And then Butler quickly takes off his trench coat to reveal that he had a suicide vest on. And Lois freaks out and says, is that what I think that is? And then Butler quickly handcuffed Lois's right hand to his right hand, and he says, yes, that is what you think that is, Miss Lane. That is a suicide vest containing gelinite explosives. And Lois says, if this is your idea of a joke, this is not funny. And Butler answers her, believe me, this is no joke. And then Jimmy at that moment walks right up to them, and he says to Lois, hey Lois, check out these pictures that I taken of the Man of the Year awards banquet. And then he had noticed that Lois was handcuffed to Butler, and he notices Butler's suicide vest, and he says, hey, what's going on here? And then Lois says to Jimmy, he calls himself the human bomb. And then Jimmy says to her, is he going to explode? And then Butler says, that's entirely up to Miss Lane. Then Jimmy goes for the handcuffs, and he says, hey, buddy, let her go, or else I'm going to book you one. Then Butler reaches for the detonator in the center of his vest, and he says, be careful, kid. If I press this button, all three of us are going to be Kingdom Come. Then Jimmy crosses his arm and angrily says to Butler, oh, how are you kidding? That stuff ain't really dynamite. Then Butler reaches with his free left hand to the back pocket of his pants and pulls out a stick of explosives and hands it to Jimmy. Jimmy looks at it and reads aloud, gelinite explosive. Then Jimmy says to Butler, well, it looks real, and he puts the stick on Lois's desk. Then Lois says to Butler, all right, suppose it is real. What do you want? Money, I suppose. Then Butler answers her back, no, not money, at least not from you. All I want is Superman. And then Lois angrily says to Butler, "In the first place, what makes you think I could deliver Superman? And if I could, what do you want with him?" Then Lois tells Jimmy, "Jimmy, go get the chief." And then Jimmy asks Lois, "Should I call the police?" And then Butler says to Jimmy, "By all means, Jimmy, call them too." Jimmy darts off to the direction of the chief's office. And Lois says to Butler, "You know you're going to jail for this." And then Butler says, "Oh, I know, but it'll be well worth it." Then Lois asks Butler, "Well, you don't mind if I sit down?" And Butler says to her, "No. As a matter of fact, once your little friend raises the alarm, it's going to get crowded in here, and I don't like to be crowded." Then Butler walks over to the window in the far end of the newsroom, dragging Lois along. As he arrives to one of the windows, he opens it up and sticks his head out to look at the downtown traffic high above. Then Butler puts his head back in and looks at Lois, and he says to her, "Quite high, aren't we?" And then Butler looks out the window again, and then he looks back at Lois and he says, "We won't be so crowded out on that ledge." And Lois says to Butler, "Well, it might get windy." And then Butler says, "Well, let's try it and find out." Then Lois says, pulling Butler's arm, "Oh God, no, I get sick and dizzy." And Butler says back to her, "Be careful, Miss Lane. Remember, the detonator," as he had his finger on the button. When he saw Lois calm down, and then he says to her, "Now, Miss Lane, be a good girl and do what I say." Then Butler proceeded to take Lois out on the ledge with him. Meanwhile, at Perry White's office, Perry White hangs up the phone and tells the frantic Jimmy, "No answer from Clark. He must be on his way back." And Jimmy says, "Gosh, I hope so. Someone's got to do something." And then Perry White angrily gets up from his desk chair and he says, "What are you inferring? That Clark can do anything that I can't?" Then Jimmy says, "Oh no, I'm sorry, Mr. White. I didn't mean it that way. I'm just saying that Lois is in there with that nut and Clark can get in touch with Superman." Then Perry White says angrily to Jimmy, "Are you inferring that Superman can do something I can't do?" And then Jimmy says to Perry White, "Well, sir, I know you're going to fire me for saying this, but yes, he can do something you can't do." Perry White's angry face softens, and he says to Jimmy, "You're right, let's go," and the two men exit the office. Meanwhile, outside on the ledge, Lois looks nervously down at the traffic below, while Butler was just standing there, cool, calm, and collected. Then the chief and Jimmy run into the newsroom, but they were not there. And then the chief looks at Jimmy angrily and he says to him, "Are you trying to kid me? Where are they?" And then Jimmy says, "They were here, Chief. I don't know where they're at now." Suddenly, one of the reporters comes back into the newsroom and the chief screams at him, "Sam, did you see Lois leave the newsroom?" And then Sam says to the chief, "No, sir, I haven't." Then Jimmy quickly looks around the newsroom, but there was one more place he decided to check. He had noticed it in the peripheral vision of his eyes. The window was open, and Jimmy ran to the window, stuck his head out to see, and he sees Butler and Lois on the ledge, and he screams aloud, "Wow!" Hearing it, the chief ran to the direction where Jimmy was at and sees Jimmy's head sticking out the window. He quickly sticks his head out the window when he arrived, and then he sees Lois with Butler, and he says to Lois, "Lois, get in here at this minute!" And Lois says frantically, as Butler was pulling her away from the window, "I would love to, Chief, but he won't let me." Then the chief runs to the nearest desk and picks up the phone and dials 911. Meanwhile, back out on the ledge, the nervous Lois Lane says to Butler, "Can we just go inside and talk about this calmly?" And then Butler says to her, "No, I want to get us farther away from this window," and begins moving further away from the window. As he was doing that, Lois does a misstep and almost falls to her death, and Butler quickly catches her and pushes her up against the wall, and he says to her, "It's your high heels." Then Lois slowly takes off her heels, and Butler kicks off her shoes from the ledge. As he did that, a crowd of spectators that had gathered on the ground below to see what was going on quickly moved out of the way as one of the spectators screams, "Look out!" as he saw the falling shoes coming their way. As everyone cleared the way, the shoes hit the ground and the heels broke. At that moment, Clark was coming in. He was wondering, why was everyone gathered around at the Daily Planet building? What would they were looking up at? And then Clark looks up and sees Lois on the ledge with Butler. Clark quickly ran inside the Daily Planet building. Meanwhile, in a building not too far away from the Daily Planet, two men, one short older man and a tall, heavyset younger man, were looking at what was going on. The older short man had binoculars, and the younger man asked the older man, "So Superman there yet?" As the older man was looking at Lois and Butler on the ledge, and he says to his young friend, "No, not yet." Meanwhile, in the newsroom, Jimmy and the Chief were telling Clark what was going on, and they asked Clark, "Can you find Superman?" And Clark says, "Well, that's going to be hard, because, I don't exactly have Superman's number, and I can find Superman, but it's not easy. I don't know when I'm going to be able to make contact with him. It could be in 5 minutes, it could be in 5 hours. I just don't have control when he appears." When Clark was saying that, he was also holding in his hands the stick of Gelinite that Butler gave to Jimmy. And then he says to Jimmy, "It looks real enough to me." And then he says to White and Jimmy, "Well, if you excuse me, fellas, I have to go find Superman if we're going to save Lois." And Clark darts off from the newsroom, and he goes to his trusty changing place, the janitor's closet. As he was taking off his glasses and undoing his tie, he opens the door and enters the janitor's closet and quickly shuts the door behind him. Meanwhile, out on the ledge, Lois says to Butler, "We could be days out here waiting for Superman." And Butler says to Lois, "I highly doubt that. He seems to show up when you're in trouble. Maybe he likes you." Butler was raising both eyebrows up and down repeatedly as he says that. Afterwards, Butler reaches in to his pocket and pulls out a pack of cigarettes. He puts one in his mouth and takes his lighter. As he was about to light up, Lois says, "I would ask you to please not smoke around the explosives." And then Butler says to Lois, "Don't worry, this is Gelinite. It has to be ignited electrically. But if it makes you nervous, Miss Lane, then I won't smoke," he says to her. And then he proceeds to put his cigarette back in his pocket with the lighter. Then Lois sees Superman coming in for a landing, and Butler saw him too. And then Superman lands right on the ledge, and Lois says, "Superman, how did you find out about what was going on?" And Superman says, "It's hardly a secret," and he looks down at the spectators below. And Butler quickly says to Superman, "Don't come any closer," as he puts his finger near the detonation button. Then Superman asks Butler, "What do you want?" And then Butler says to Superman, "I just want your company for 30 minutes. And Superman says to Butler, "How do I know that the suicide vest is not fake?" And then Butler says to Superman, "Oh, the vest is real, the danger is real, and I left a stick of that Gelinite in the newsroom to prove that I'm not bluffing." Then Superman walks into the newsroom from the open window with Jimmy screaming, "Chief, look, Superman!" And Perry says, "Oh, thank God." Then Superman walks up to the desk where the Gelinite stick was placed, but there was Inspector Hill who was holding the stick. And then he asks Inspector Hill, the Metropolis PD, "So, Inspector, is it a real stick of Gelinite?" And Inspector Hill says to Superman, "Well, it looks real, feels real, and even smells real. I don't know. But I'm not taking any chances with Lois's life," he says to Superman. And Superman says, "I agree." And then Superman asks Jimmy, "Jimmy, can you get me your camera? I'm going to do something with it. You might not like it, but in this situation, I gotta find out if this stick of Gelinite is real." Jimmy says, "Okay," and Jimmy hands over his camera to Superman, and Superman quickly proceeds to dismantle Jimmy's camera, and he gets out the circuit for the flash of the camera, and he quickly grabs the button that takes photos and the battery, and then he rigged a small detonation device to the Gelinite stick. Then he says to everybody, "Alright everybody, I'm going to see if this is real or not." Then Superman flies out the window and flies several hundred feet into the air, and then he presses the button, and then there was a loud explosion. Then Superman flies back down and lands on the ledge by Butler, and he says to Butler, "Alright, what do you want?" And Butler says, "You're convinced that my Gelinite stick was real." And Superman says, "Okay, what do you want?" And Butler says, "Your cooperation for 30 minutes. And Superman says angrily to Butler, "You have to be more specific." And Butler says to Superman, "Well, I wagered $100,000 that I could control you for 30 minutes while a robbery that you know about is being committed." And then Superman says to Butler angrily, "You're saying that you're risking the life of Miss Lane for a stupid bet?" And Butler says, "Yes. Well, Inspector Hill, a policeman, and Jimmy and Perry White were looking out the window, and Inspector Hill was saying, 'Is this man crazy?' And Jimmy says to the inspector, 'Oh, you got that right.' Then Butler explains to Superman, 'A robbery at the museum is going to be committed. Nothing of value will be stolen, but you will remain here while the robbery is occurring. Is that clear?' said Butler to Superman, and Superman said, 'Yes.' And then Inspector Hill shouts out from the window, 'Oh, it's clear to him, but not clear to me.' And then Perry White says to Inspector Hill, 'Let him handle it. He's got it under control.' Then Superman says, 'Well then, I'm going inside. Seeing Lois like this makes me nervous.' And then Lois says to Superman, 'Makes you nervous? What about me? I'm out here handcuffed to a lunatic with a suicide vest.' Superman steps back inside to the newsroom, and everyone asks him, 'What are you going to do? Are you going to stop the robbery?' asks Inspector Hill. And then Superman says, 'Listen, I can't really do anything right now, or else he's going to blow himself up, and Lois, and probably half of this floor with that Gelinite,' says Superman. But then Superman says, 'I did think of something.' And he turns to look at Jimmy, and he says, 'Jimmy, bring a microphone and bring your laptop.' Jimmy smiles and says, 'Yes, sir.' And then Jimmy got what Superman asked. And then Jimmy gives Superman the microphone and plugs the USB of the microphone into the USB port of his laptop. And then he activates the recording program. And Superman says, 'I am not going to talk to you until the allotted time is over.' And then Superman says to Jimmy, 'Jimmy, grab your speakers. We're going to use them.' And Jimmy runs to get his speakers for his laptop. And then he says to Inspector Hill, 'Well, Inspector Hill, that would distract him. He doesn't know that I left.' And then he says to Inspector Hill, 'I'm going to stop that robbery. All Jimmy has to do is keep playing that recording each time that the human bomb asks me if I'm still here.' And then Jimmy comes back with the speakers, and then he explains his plans to Jimmy. And then Superman sticks his head back out the window and tells Butler, 'Alright, human bomb, I'm going to just sit here and wait for the entire 30 minutes, and I'm going to say this to you. When this is over, you're going to be very sorry,' said Superman sternly to Butler. Then Superman proceeds to stick his head back into the newsroom, and then he goes up to the roof and flies off to stop the robbery. Meanwhile, at the museum, Butler's two hired henchmen quickly make out of the museum with some objects, and they get into an old beat-up Ford Taurus and speed off. The crooks inside the car were all happy and talking to one another, with the lead crook saying, 'I can't believe it. The boss did it. The boss was able to subdue Superman for 30 minutes. Wow.' And then the other crook in the passenger seat says, 'Man, I can't believe it myself.' And then he sees that his friend was really picking up speed, and he says, 'Hey, Mike, why are you going so fast? We won.' And then Mike says to the crook in the passenger seat, 'Hey, I'm not taking any chances. I still don't trust Superman. Remember, he's faster than a speeding bullet.' And after saying that, Superman suddenly drops right in front of the speeding getaway car, but it was too late. And the Ford Taurus crashes right into Superman at over 80 miles an hour. Of course, the two crooks did not have their seatbelts on, and both men went flying out the windshield and landed on the wrecked hood of the car. Superman scans both men with his X-ray vision to reveal they both had very severe injuries. Superman stayed with them, rendered aid, until the police and fire and rescue came to take these men. Meanwhile, back at the Daily Planet, Butler was still on the ledge with the handcuffed Lois next to him. And he kept asking Superman, "So are you going to say anything else, Superman, but that one sentence?" And then Jimmy played the recording, and then he looks at Lois and says, "I guess not." And then as they were waiting and waiting, Butler decided to try it again to see if Superman would say something else. It's like, "So Superman, how does the Earth look from way up there, thousands of feet in the air as you're flying, without any jet engines or pressurized cabins?" Jimmy was going to play the recording again when all of a sudden an error occurred and the program crashed. Jimmy says, "Ah, dang it! Stupid Windows Vista! This thing's a piece of crap!" as he was screaming. Then Butler overheard everything outside, and then he says, "Superman? Superman, are you still there? Answer me, Superman?" Then he looks at Lois and says, "Oh, so Superman was being tricky." And then Jimmy sticks his head out the window and he says, "Sorry, but Superman left a while ago to stop the robbery." And then Butler says angrily, "Okay, so Superman wants to play tricks. Well, too bad. This is gonna cost him." And then Jimmy says, "Wrong." And Jimmy steps onto the ledge and walks towards Butler. Butler says, "Hey kid, what are you doing? You better stay away. I will blow us all up." And Lois says frantically to Jimmy, "Jimmy, don't. We're really high up." And then Jimmy says, "Don't worry, Lois. I am not letting this guy push us around." And then Jimmy goes right after Butler, and the two men scuffle while the frantically nervous Lois Lane looks on in terror as she was being pulled along with Butler as he was fighting Jimmy on the ledge. Unbeknownst to Butler, Jimmy managed to snap one of the connecting wires to the detonator, and then Butler pushes Jimmy right off the ledge. Jimmy was falling to certain death, but Superman dives in and grabs Jimmy. Meanwhile, Butler says, "All right, Miss Lane, they want to play hardball? I can play hardball." And then he was reaching over for his detonator, and Lois screams, "Butler, no, no!" And then Butler presses the button, but there was no effect. He saw that the connecting wire was snapped. But then Superman rises up with Jimmy in his arms, and he puts Jimmy on the ledge, and he says, "Okay, Butler, the show's over. Your friends are heading to the emergency room, and as for you, you're heading to jail." Then Superman uses his heat vision to snap the chain of the handcuffs, freeing Lois from Butler. Lois quickly goes right over to Superman and she embraces Superman. She says, "Oh, thank you, Superman, thank you." Superman holds Lois tight and says, "It's okay, Miss Lane. I'm just thankful that I made it back in time to save Jimmy." And then he points the finger for Butler to go back to the window. Butler makes his way back down to the window and into the newsroom of the Daily Planet with his head hanging low in shame. And then the police quickly arrest him. And then Superman and Lois get back into the newsroom. And then Inspector Hill says, "Well, fellas and lady, you won't believe who this is. This is Betta Million Butler," he says to them. And he goes on to explain, "This man likes to make very high stakes bets around some very high-stake crimes. He's won a good fortune on these. Well, it looks like Butler's fortune is run out." Then Inspector Hill pulls the handcuffed Butler with him away from the office with the other officers following. And then Superman says to Lois, Jimmy, and the Chief, "Well, if you excuse me, everybody, I have to go." And then everyone waves to Superman and thanks him. Superman steps out the open window onto the ledge and leaps off and flies off. Then moments later, Clark comes running into the newsroom and he says to everybody, "Well, I see Superman was able to get here on time. Whew, it's very hard to find that man," said Clark. And then Lois says, "That's where you were the whole time, looking for Superman?" And then Clark says, "Well, Lois, I don't hear a thank you. If it wasn't for me finding Superman, you probably would have been dead." And Lois says, I'm sorry, Clark. Thank you. Thank you so much for finding Superman. And then Jimmy says, yeah, Mr. Kent, thank you so much. Because if it wasn't for Superman, I would have been a big ugly stain on the pavement below. And then Perry White starts chewing out Jimmy for his stunt that he pulled taking on Butler on the ledge. And then, of course, Jimmy had nothing to say. And then Clark says, well, if you excuse me, everybody, I think it's already my lunchtime. And then he smiles and leaves the newsroom to go to his lunch. Like and subscribe. The end.